Alrighty, we're gonna get started. I want to welcome everyone to the final reading of the Nelson Boswell reading series at New Mexico State University. My name is Pardeep Toor, and I'll be sort of your preliminary host today, but Leora Zeitlin of Zephyr Press is going to be doing the majority of the emceeing today, and we're so delighted to have her, as well as Jim Kates, both of whom are co-directors of the Zephyr Press. And I'll get to them here in a second. I want to start by thanking the Southwestern Border Cultures Institute at NMSU for providing support for this reading and for providing support all year. They've been essential for us to be able to not only provide the technological support, but invite authors. So we're so thankful for their support, as well as Classroom Technology and AV Services at NMSU, specifically Frank and David, who've been just an enormous helping us put these on through COVID. So thank you so much. I want to remind everyone that the Q&A is open. So if you have questions about the work, about the reading, or any other questions, please feel free to submit a question, and we do have scheduled time to get to those after the reading. So it's my honor today to introduce Leora Zeitlin, who will be our MC today. Leora is the co-director of the award-winning Zephyr Press. The press is internationally renowned and has won numerous book awards and translation awards, and too many for me to list now, but I am going to put a link in the chat for everyone to see for themselves. It's truly an incredible press and really a gem for all of us. Leora has been with Zephyr Press since the beginning. This year marked the 40th anniversary of the press. And what's also unique about the press is it has a really unique and long history of collaboration with NMSU. And we're so happy to continue that collaboration and invigorate it today with our reading. Leora, in addition to her work with Zephyr Press, is a writer, editor, classical music host on KRWG, and then just a huge local celebrity. So without further ado, I wanted to hand this reading off to Leora Zeitlin.
Thank you so much, Pardeep, and for that nice introduction. Thank you, Frank, for the behind the scenes help, and thank you, Russ Bradford and NMSU English Department and La Sociedad para las Artes for organizing this final reading of this most unusual academic year. We're honored to partner with La Sociedad for this event again in the English department. Today's reading is both an auspicious occasion for us and a rather unconventional one as poetry readings go. It's auspicious because it marks the very first time that the poet, Aigerim Tazhi, and the translator, Jim Kates, are presenting a reading together, even though they've been collaborating on the poetry for many years. It's unconventional because Tazhi is in Almaty, Kazakhstan, where it's 2:30 in the morning and where the internet is often unstable. Tazhi asked that she record herself reading the poems in advance, which she did. Jim recorded himself and we edited it together in a video that we'll show you shortly. Jim is here with us from New Hampshire and will be happy to answer questions after the video. He'll also talk to you before it. And at the end, he'll present some of the newer poems that he's been translating of Tazhi. Aigerim Tazhi was born in a northwestern city of Kazakhstan when the country was still part of the Soviet Union. As a result, Russian was the language she was schooled in and the language spoken on the street. She can speak the Kazakh language, but she writes in Russian. Her debut book of poetry, Bogoslov, was published in 2003. It translates as theologian or theologian, but a play on words could make it God o' Words. She has received numerous literary prizes in Kazakhstan and Russia, and in 2011 was a finalist for the Russian Debut Prize in Poetry. Her work has been translated into English, French, Armenian, maybe other languages by now, and published in prominent literary magazines. Zephyr Press published her debut book in English, Paper Thin Skin, which you'll be hearing poems from, in 2019. Jim Kates, the translator, is a poet, literary translator, and co-director of Zephyr Press. He's written several collections of his own poetry and is the translator of more than a dozen books of Russian and French poets. including Tatiana Sherbina, Mikhail Eisenberg, Mikhail Yeryomin, Alexei Porvin, Jean-Pierre Ronet, and Sergei Stratanovsky. He also co-translated 4 books of Latin American poetry and was the translation editor of 2 major anthologies of Russian poetry. He's been awarded 3 National Endowment for the Arts fellowships and several other fellowships and prizes. The recorded part of this reading includes poems from our bilingual collection of Tazhi's poetry, Paper Thin Skin, which I'm holding up right now. In general, Tazhi writes very short poems. So as you'll see in the recording, you'll hear her read 5 or so poems at a time, and then Jim will read the English versions of those same poems, and they'll move back and forth. Again, thank you all for being here, and I'm delighted to present first Jim Kates, and then the video of him reading with Aigerim Tazhi.
Thank you, Leora. It's always a pleasure to work with you. In August 2012, I got an inquiry from an editor at Words Without Borders, an online journal, asking if I would be willing to look at a few poems by a Kazakhstani poet for a special issue that they were publishing on literature of the old Silk Road. I knew nothing at all about the poet, but the samples they sent caught my attention. They sent me about 6 poems. I made rough drafts, refined the one they wanted to use, and we were off and running. I asked to be put in touch with the poet, and I asked to see more of her work because I really enjoyed reading and translating it. She was happy to oblige. We have communicated since in these last more than 8 years now, only by email. We had been hoping that this event today would be our first actual appearance together, but the logistics haven't worked out. As Leora told you, she was born in Aktobe and she writes in Russian. Kazakhstan is officially a bilingual country. Tazhi says that Russian is the language that I've spoken since childhood. She doesn't choose it specially, it's just that language with her. But her poetry is deeply Kazakhstani in theme and feel. At the same time, her work has been recognized in the heart of Russian culture, in the centers of Russian culture. In fact, just yesterday, I guess it was, she sent me the newest issue of Novy Mir, which is a major Russian literary magazine, and it features 12 of her newest poems. Fortunately for me as a translator, Tazhi also has a feel for English. Our collaboration spans chasms of age and gender as well as culture, and somehow has proved remarkably productive and congenial for all this time. She prefers to let the poem speak and not the poet, and she recoils from injecting herself into the text and from setting a poem in an autobiographical framework. Her poems, as you will hear, are concerned far less with herself than with the world around her. She writes from the inside out rather than the outside in. She makes her own persona not the center of attention, but the center of perception. And it's with that I would like to introduce her own reading of her own poems.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to say you a couple of words in English before reading. My name is Aigerim Tazhi. I live in Kazakhstan in Almaty city. This is my book, Paper Thin Skin. Here you can find my poems in Russian and the translations into English made by Jim Kates. Today I am going to read some poems from this collection. I think it is strange to listen to poetry in a known language, but I hope it helps you to feel its original sound, rhyme, and rhythm. So, let's start. Верблюжьей походкой путник пылит, приближается. Глаза разного цвета, руки вырезанные из дерева. За пазухой гадюка мертвая, жалящая веревка. Конь пал на дороге, хрупкий как ветка, остов, волны песочной шкуры. Имя твое Выговори хоть слово. Складки лица. Солнце меняет угол. Бумажная кожа просвечивает. На лбу проявляются буквы. Лето. Беззвучный праздник с лесом ночным устрой. Горы молчат сегодня. Тропа подставляет плечо. В той темноте наткнемся ль на выросшую скалу? Белая птица, крикни, камнем предупреди. Звери давно исчезли, знаю, до нас еще. Чье же копыто стало ложем для озерца? В шорохе мягком слышно спутников. Впереди дом на вершине, точка, гаснущая к утру. В доме окно, на окне горшок, в горшке веточка. Вяжет пинетки сонная женщина, внутри нее рыба без воздуха мечется, а ей хорошо. Улыбается будто себе в живот, криком на улице, разбитой лампочке, черным вестям из нечерного ящика. Женщина ждет непременного мальчика, девочка тоже сойдет. Прислушиваюсь к придуманному миру, он впитывает музыку извне, и внутренней стране не уберечь границ. Мотив покоя умножит радость, мне легко, вдвойне. Но что-то не дает забыться сном. Безлунной ночью или ярким днем замечу странное. Откуда звук? Так дребезжат засушенные жилы в задетом инструменте. Древесину упрямо точит невидимка жук. В коробке из-под немецкого шоколада мать прячет бирки, зубы, первые волосы, сына, живущего где-то в пределах города, звонящего в день рождения уставшим голосом. Когда приходит этот, уже мужчина, с руками в венах, с букетом цветов дешевых, она наливает чашку до половины, чтобы он поскорей ушел.
Walking like a camel, a traveler throws up dust, draws near. Eyes of different colors, hands carved from wood, a dead viper in his breast, a rope with fangs. A horse felled in the road, fragile as a twig, a skeleton, waves of a sandy pelt. Your name, say the word out loud, a furrowed face. The angle of the sun shifts, paper-thin skin translucent, letters shine through the forehead. Summer, organize a soundless holiday with a forest at night. The mountains are silent today. The path exposes its shoulder. In that dark, will we collide with a rising rock face? White bird, shout, worn with a stone. The animals have long since disappeared before us. Whose hoofprints stamped out the hollow of a lake? Fellow travelers can be heard in a light rustling. Ahead, a house on the summit is a point fading into the morning. In the house, a window. In the window, a pot. In the pot, a twig. A drowsy woman is knitting booties. Inside her, a fish swims without air, but she is content. She smiles as if to her own womb, at shouts in the street, at broken lights, at dark news from the bright box. The woman waits for the inevitable boy. A girl will do as well. I strain to listen for an imagined world, one that absorbs music from the outside and will not preserve the borders of an internal country. The peaceful theme multiplies joy, doubles my ease. But something obstructs the oblivion of a dream. On a moonless night or on a bright day, I hear something strange. Coming from where? Desiccated tendons resonate on a strummed instrument. An invisible beetle stubbornly gnaws in the woodwork. Underneath, in a German chocolate box, mother hides the name tag, the teeth, the first hair of her son, who lives somewhere on the outskirts of town, who calls on her birthday in a weary voice. When he comes to visit, a man now, with his gnarled hands, with a bouquet of cheap flowers, she pours the cup of tea only half full, so he won't stay long.
Фиолетовое окно, желтое, скоростное через страны пряные, разрезает полотно с подсолнухами на солнечную сторону и закатную. В цветовом пятне глаз выхватывает мельницы, летящие в противоположную. В нитях ветра звуки запутались встречные. Лавандовое окно, скачут крепкие лошади. Хороводы полных людей видятся там, где дома-пряники, неестественно красивые дети и дамы, похожие на вызревающую квашню, качая боками, плывут по траве к реке. Дорогу спросить бы, но вряд ли потом пойму. Ответ на неведомом языке. Деревья знают, просыпаться рано. Наутро мир накроет слоем снега. Холодный ветер с запахом цветочным качает тень, колодцем свет луны. В овале от кривого абажура танцует насекомое ночное. Уставшая от лет седая кошка под тюлем душит призрачную мышь. Не спящий в Тибете похож на таких же, как здесь. Луны циферблат растекается на небосклоне. Спускается с гор посидевший на треть незнакомец. В руках несет старые книги, в них новая весть. И мимо проходит, не глядя, как будто ослеп. Ногами ступает по лужам, роняет страницы. На ветке засохшей кричит тонконогая птица. Он входит в туман, за ним закрывается лес. Подслушав в парке разговор, пришла к зачавшей старой сливе и в крону спрятала лицо. Вначале с жаром говорила, потом, стесняясь, угрожала. Если не дашь плодов, срублю. Так сливами рвануло небо, как будто дернула за бусы. 3 дня фруктового безумства и пирование надоело. Плоды, как мусор на траве, растоптаны в пюре. И где-то будни превратились в чудо. Стрекозье, замирающее лето, растит кувшинки в сохнущем пруду. Хоть мне не надо, я туда иду. За аркой переплетшихся деревьев забытый дом, холодный, нездоровый, случайно сохранил знакомый цвет. Смотрю, кочная штора, все же нет. И солнце блики щедрые бросает, вычерчивая сломленность пространства. Углем и мелом на пустом столе наброски перелистывает свет. Кувшин с отбитым клювом, сердцевины, цветочные наколоты на стебли. Лежит все тот же плюшевый медведь. Или не он на пыльном пианино. Мне с этой стороны не разглядеть. У моря большие легкие и огромный рот. Сегодня на ужин съест не того, а завтра этого пожует. На берегу почерневший моряк раскладывает сокровища у ног. Рыба к рыбе, с морским ежом играет чужой щенок.
A purple window, a yellow one. The express train in pungent land slices through a canvas with sunflowers, a sunny side and a sunset side. In one colorful spot, the eye seizes on mills flying in the opposite direction. Threads of wind mute onrushing sounds. A lavender window. Strong horses gallop. Round dances of stout people are honored among gingerbread houses. Unnaturally beautiful children and ladies, rising like dough, shaking their sides, float along the grass to a river. I should ask the way, but then would hardly understand the reply in some unknown language. The trees know it is early to wake up. In the morning, the world will be covered with snow. A cold wind smelling of flowers shakes this shade. A well of moonlight. In the oval of a curved lampshade, a nocturnal insect dances. Worn out by his years, the old gray cat under the sheer curtain strangles a spectral mouse. Sleepless in Tibet, just like those here, the dial of the moon spills across the horizon, comes down from the mountains onto a third. A grizzled stranger holds in his hands old books, in them fresh news, and passes by without looking, as if blind. He places his feet in puddles, he drops pages on a dry branch, a thin-shanked bird screams. He enters the fog, and the woods close behind him. I overheard a conversation in the park, came up to a withered old plum tree and hid my face in its crown. First, I spoke up strongly, then embarrassed, threatened. Give me your fruit or I'll cut you down. So the sky exploded in plums as if a bead necklace had broken. 3 days of a frenzy of fruit until I'd had enough of feasting. Fruit lay like garbage on the grass, mashed into a puree. And somewhere everyday life turned into a miracle. A dragonfly summer, stock still, grows water lilies in a shrinking pond. Though I don't need to, I'm going there. Beyond the arch of interlaced trees, a forgotten house, unhealthy and chill, accidentally preserved the familiar color I look at. Was the blind swinging? No. And the sun throws lavish glares marking out the brokenness of space, with charcoal and chalk on an empty table. The light leaks through the outlines, a jug with a broken spout, hearts of flowers pinned on their stalks. The same teddy bear still lies, or that's not it, on the dusty piano. From over here I cannot see for sure. The sea has enormous lungs. The sea has a monstrous mouth. Today it makes a dinner of one, tomorrow will chew up another. On the strand, a blackened sailor lays out treasures at his feet, fish to fish. Someone else's puppy is playing with a sea urchin.
Окна направлены на восток. Лето бьется за занавесками. Пахнет подушка недавним сном, утром воскресным, детством. Ключ повернулся в тугом замке. Кто там пришел и спешит разуться? В теплой пижаме, в одном носке. Добежать к нему, не споткнуться. Наверное, Бог похож на умирающего человека. У него в глазах то, чего никому не видно. Над головой остатки сияющей ауры. На губах соль выступила, на лбу испарина. Я смотрю на него, и мне от чего-то стыдно. «Дайте мне воды», — думает он, не произнося ни слова. Справа мать и праматерь сидят, отец с пращуром слева. В изножье карлики, великаны у изголовья. Пришли и молчат, вспоминают, как он выходил из чрева. Он перед ними младенец голый, которому не все возможно, но все прилично. Другие плачут, громко молят его о прощении. А у него в ушах звучит собственный голос. Будущего нет и не будет, будущего нет и не будет, и прошлое слишком призрачно. На ладан не дыши, дышать здесь нечем. Зря говорят, что сельский воздух лечит. Соднящий в носоглотке дым костра меняет очертания. Глядись же, буреют в куче скошенные астры. Садовник выкорчевывает липу, которая ни разу не цвела. И еще немного. Дернется кто-то в ветвях, испугавшись кашля, и сорвет покрывало с кроны, статуя дерева. Брызнет морозной солью, вопьется в кожу. Кто ты, безвестный скульптор в белом плаще? Кто ты, зашивший черные раны на зимней реке после вечернего потепления? Тихо, на берег другой, по свежему шву, перебирая ногами метры прозрачных недр, листья впаяны в карамельную глубину, и внутри все стеклянно, лишь дернется нерв и расколет слой. Птица выпорхнет из-под ног, улетит домой. Из кожи выплывает жаркая середина, апельсин, солнце январское. Пальцы желтые, витаминные. Нимб из эфирных масел вспыхивает над свечой, за стеной мороз. У ног поскуливает в полусне. Тонкоребрый пес смотрит мимо, сквозь, ловит птицу, рождающуюся в огне. Когда память не та и руки уже не те, когда животное просыпается в животе, меркнет лампочка в голове, то рождается в пустоте голос того, кто мог вырасти из тебя. Да что-то не повезло. Спрашивает, какое уже число.
Windows opening to the east. Summer beats behind the curtains. The pillow smells of recent sleep. Sunday morning. Childhood. A key turned in the stiff lock. Who's coming there now, shaking his shoes off? In warm pajamas, wearing a single stock, run up to him without stumbling. Probably God is like a dying person. In his eyes, what no one can see. Over his head, the remains of a shining aura. Salt on his lips, perspiration popped out on his brow. I look at him, and something in me feels shame. Give me water, he thinks, not saying the words. To the right, foremothers sit, forefathers to the left. At the foot, dwarves, giants at the head have come in and say nothing. They remember how he came out of the womb. Before them, he is a naked infant to whom not everything is possible, but everything is proper. Others weep loudly, pray for forgiveness, but in his ears, it is his own voice sounding. There is no, there will be no future. There is no, there will be no future. And the past is far too illusory. Don't take one last breath. Nothing to breathe here. In vain they say that country air cures. Campfire smoke burns your nostrils. It alters all outlines. Look closely. Cut asters wilt in heaps. A gardener uproots a linden that never blossomed, not once. Someone among the branches twitches, startled by a cough, plucks the veil from the crown. The statue of a tree, sprinkles with frosty salt, pierces the skin. Who are you, unknown sculptor in a white coat? Who are you who stitched black wounds on the winter river after the warmth of evening? Quietly on the far bank along the fresh seam, plucking with feet meters of transparent depths, leaves are soldered in the caramel depth, and inside all is glass. Only a nerve twitches and cracks a layer of ice. A bird flutters from underfoot, flies away home. A warm center floats up from the skin. The orange is a January sun, yellow fingers, vitamins. A halo of essential oils blazes up over a candle. Frost outside the wall. Half asleep at my feet, a skinny-ribbed hound whimpers. It looks past, through it all, catches a bird being born in the fire. When the memory is not the same and hands are not the same, when an animal wakes up in your belly, a light bulb grows dim in your head, a voice born in the cavity of one who might grow out of you, something was really unlucky, asks, what day is it?
Фиалка пьет из поддона вчерашнее море, процеженное землей. Солнце щупает комнату, воду в стакане нагревает упрямый луч. У него нить в руках, которая вот-вот лопнет, звон струны вдалеке. Обернись ко мне, человек, дай увидеть себя. Лицо вечереет. Прозрачный свет отступает в холодный сад. Муравьиных тропинок след. На подушке чужая тень. Законный листопад. От воскресенья до воскресенья ставим крестики календарные, ждем спасения. Оно приходит в виде воздуха горного в газовой камере города. Серебристые муравьи тащат к вершине камни, трутся стальными боками. Чешется след на шее от тесного ворота под ватными облаками. Бегун с фонариком на голове выхватывает кадры из темноты. Земля просевшая, глазастый зверь, поляна вытоптана, блеск воды, кустарник, глыбы коровьих тел, могилки, дуб на краю села, на ветках шляпки от желудей, пустые, мелкие колокола. У Бога полный карман людей, у нищего полный карман счастья. Поделись со мной, человек, у меня есть море взамен. Большое теплое море, рыба, лодка и снасти. Когда умирает тело, сытые орлы и рыбы, не смог промолчать Лапсанг за общим обедом, разравнивая на тарелке остатки риса. Чью душу хранишь ты, карп, обглоданный до скелета? Засейте рис на полях, где лежали люди. Пройдите по той земле, когда рис созреет, и пеструю очередь к раскрашенной карусели займите, веселые и босые, чтоб вас не съели. И еще одно стихотворение прочту вам. На зов поворачивается сперва большая львиная голова. Солнце над вершиной горба смотрит внутрь тебя. Медленно промывая речной песок, ищет самородок, но в решете пустая порода. Камни гремят в воде. И после былого огня остыл лесной частокол, ядовита пыль. Но дышит ребенок, узнавший страх, хоть кажется неживым.
A violet sucks from a saucer yesterday's sea filtered through the earth. The sun gropes around the room, a stubborn beam warms a glass of water. Any minute now his thread will burst, the sounding of a distant string. Turn in my direction, an actual person. Let me see you. Your face is growing dark. Transparent light withdraws into a cold garden. Tracks of an ant trail. An unfamiliar shadow on the pillow. Outside the window, falling leaves. From resurrection to Sunday, we cross off dates on the calendar, waiting for salvation. It comes in the form of mountain air in the gas chamber of a city. Silvery ants drag along up to the stone height, rub against steel sides, itching, tracks left on the neck from a narrow gate under quilted clouds. A runner with a flashlight on his head grabs frames from the darkness. The sinking land, a wide-eyed beast, a glade trampled, a glint of water. Shrubbery, lumps of bovine bodies, a graveyard, an oak at the edge of the village, acorn caps clinging to branches, little empty bells. God has a pocket full of people, a beggar, a pocket full of happiness, one shared with me. I have a sea in return, a large warm sea, a fish, a boat, and tackle. When the body dies, eagles and fish dine well. Lobsang at the communal dinner could not keep quiet, spreading out the remains of rice on the plate. Whose soul do you save, carp picked to the skeleton? Sow rice in the fields where people lay, pass by that earth when the rice will grow, and you join the motley queue at the bright carousel, cheerful and barefoot, to keep from being eaten. First at a call, a large lion's head pivots. The sun over the top of a hump looks inside you. Slowly washing the river sand, it's panning for a nugget, but in the sieve, useless rock, stones rattle in the water. And after an earlier fire, the forest stockade has cooled down. Poisonous dust, but a child who felt fear breathes, although he appears lifeless.
Thank you. Jim, we've got some questions. It worked out pretty well. First, we've got two people asking for you to walk through the translation process. But before we get to that, we have a question, and I'm gonna take a liberty and answer it, and then you'll expand. Somebody asked, who are Aigerim's literary or poetry influences? Are they available in English? And it just happens that this morning, in preparation for this, I reread the interview that was done with her several years ago, which you actually quote, I think, in the introduction to the book. And so I'm going to just read what she says about that question. Since my childhood, I read a lot, both poetry and prose. Of course, I am well acquainted with Russian poetry, the poetry of the Silver Age, which is the early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century Russian poetry. When I was still in school, I discovered Robert Frost and other American poets. As a teenager, the Spanish and Latin American poets, from Jimenez to Octavio Paz, made an impression on me. Now I have a very wide range of literary interests. I read foreign poetry. I watch what is going on with the poetry in Russia and in Kazakhstan. And then she says, I think that in general, every book you read can influence the writer, but I cannot say that I feel like I belong to any literary trend or that I'm a follower of a particular website. I've been writing poems for so long that I do not remember a specific moment when it all began, but I do remember well my first publication in the literary journal Apollinaire in 2002. So that's a little bit of her own words about her influences.
And that pretty well covers it. That pretty well covers it. Yeah,
okay.
that answers that more than I can.
Yeah. With the two people have asked if you can walk them through the translation process. And I do want to say, somebody has asked, where can I buy this book? Zephyrpress.org, and the link is in the chat. It's right there. It says Paper Thin Skin by Aigerim Tazhi. And so two questions, Jim. Can you walk us through the translation process? And then, well, answer that, and then I'll do the next question.
Yeah, I mean, it's after all this time, it's sort of almost become routine that Tazhi will send me some poems. She'll send me a batch of poems. In this case, most recently, as I said, poems that were published in Novi Mir, and I will look at them. I will go through and make a first draft translation, and I will send it to her, and then she will reply to me. Now, she writes to me in Russian and I write to her in English, which is good for both of us. It's a lot of fun for both of us. Her English is actually quite good. It is better than she thinks it is. And she often will take something that I have not understood, or even something that I have understood, but she will propose a synonym or a correction, and it will be on the spot. It will be a brilliant choice. So she usually writes back to me with commentary on email in a different color. I will respond to her commentary with another draft and my comments. And usually by the third or fourth go round, we have a quote final draft of a poem. Anyone who does any translation knows that there is no such thing as an absolute final draft. And actually, we had a situation recently where I sent her a draft of a poem I'd been working on, and she sent me a draft back with commentaries on it, and then I revised it, and then she said, whoops, didn't you notice we'd both translated this poem before? We'd worked on this poem before, and it's in the book. And our new version differs slightly from the version that's in the book, but that's what happens when you read poetry. She is very accepting of my knowledge of English. And I am very grateful for her knowledge of English as well as Russian.
So, Jim, what distinguishes Kazakh poetry from Russian poetry?
I can't answer that in generalities. I am not a scholar of poetry. I'm just another poet writing poetry. I will say that there are themes and images that come up in Tazhi's poetry, images of the landscape. Apples come up very frequently in her poetry. And of course, we know that if there's one thing that Kazakhstan is, one of the many things Kazakhstan is known for, it's the homeland of apples. Almaty, Alma-Ata literally means, father of apples. And the wind comes up. She writes about the wind quite a bit, comes into her poem, The Winds. And she has said that this is something very Kazakh in her poetry. So it's that. There are some of her poems which use very, very specific local generic, not generic, but local references to cultural items that don't translate easily even into Russian. And for those, of course, we have to find either equivalents or we have to leave the cultural strangeness of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of some of those images, we have a long comment here from Richard Greenfield, one of our poetry professors, and I'm just going to read it and maybe it'll spark some more conversation. Stunning poems. This is more a comment than a question. Hearing Apollinaire in that mix of influences was revealing, although I think that she's referring to Apollinaire as the name of a publication. I'm especially struck by the recurrence of the image or framing device of windows, looking outward at times, outside the window, falling leaves, and looking inward at other times. But there is something almost transcendental about the light that comes through the windows or the objects framed in these windows. I'm getting the sense from only this reading that windows might be a major motif of this poet across the poems of Aigerim Tazhi's poems. Perhaps it's too large of a leap, but they evoked for me Mallarmé's Les Fenêtres with a sense of the purity of meditation or still life. I imagined a procedural or notation poetics at play in many of these poems, as if every day the poet began by the window or looked through the window. And I just have to say one thing, because it just reminds me also, she said one of her earliest influences was Robert Frost, who has a wonderful window of a tree at my window tree. So there's another window in there.
Well, there are a number of windows in Frost, another significant windows in Frost. I think of Home Burial, the window in Home Burial is significant. And I would say that for Tazhi, I would guess this, I cannot speak for her, but she also had a background in early interest in photography and framing things or seeing things in frames. I think windows may be, as much as anything, a subset of that framing quality. And certainly there is an affinity with meditation. She has spent time in Tibet. She has an affinity, so to pick up on that sort of perspective. In a couple of her poems, she refers specifically to Tibetan themes. So that's pretty accurate. The Apollinaire is a Russian magazine. It's not the poet, but we haven't talked about how much French poetry she's read. We've talked about American poetry and Russian poetry, of course, but not American, not French very much.
Huh. Jim, back to the translation issue. I remember that there was maybe it's in the introduction, the Resurrection Sunday.
Yes.
There was a whole translation where you had to make a choice. So maybe talk through that issue of translation when you have to sometimes make a choice that may sacrifice something in one language but brings it through in a different way.
Well, there was sheer loss. In Russian, the same word, Voskresenia, means both resurrection and Monday. It differs in spelling just by a single letter, but it's actually the same word, sort of. So there's a wordplay and punning. There's a significant amount of punning that goes on in Tazhi's work of wordplay. And the question is, how much of it can I substitute for or get away with or have to leave behind? There's one poem, one which I did not read today, which we did not read today, where I threw out a lot of the literal because the wordplay was more important. The sound play was more important than keeping absolutely literally to the lines. But we went over that and we checked that. Is this okay? And it works there. So you make these choices all the time, and you and it's a matter of being humble enough to play with the words and not think that you have to be a slave to them. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, it goes further into the issue of translation, which is always, you know, obviously something's always lost, but you're creating something in English.
We went through a recent thing with a more recent poem where she used a word for a very specific kind of settlement, rural settlement, and there was no exact equivalent word. And we went back and forth, and she said, "Can't we just use that word? Oh, the way we can use the Turkic word yurt, and that will be understood in English." And I said, no, because there's a level where it can't be understood. We're going to have to lose the specificity of what you're saying here because it would require a footnote in English.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other examples where we've made other choices. There's when she uses one of her poems, the word shatyor, which is a tent or an awning, but the word tent was inappropriate. Marquee, she suggested, how about marquee? Because she looked in a dictionary. And that was an example where I had to say, no, that does not mean in English what you want it to mean. Yeah. So that's one example where we go back and forth on these.
Any other questions from our audience members? I'm not seeing any more in the Q&A or the chat, but speak now or forever hold your peace.
Ooh, I just saw a question in the question and answer, which is a very difficult one.
Here it is. It just came in. Great.
And it touches on translation.
I'll read it. Russian syntax is different from English, isn't it? Can you speak to how you manage that, if it's true?
Yes, it is. It's absolutely true. And it creates, one of the ways that Tazhi likes to write is with, is what you can do in Russian is you don't have articles to begin with. So things can sound more abstract in some ways, or more abstracted from immediacy. And also Russian can use infinitives as verbs so that you not specifying a subject. And I often have to choose when I'm translating whether to translate an infinitive as an infinitive, which usually sounds awkward in English, not always. Sometimes I translate it as a gerund into to read becomes reading. Sometimes I do have to add a subject, and sometimes we have a little tug of war. We get a little tug of war in this because she does not want to put the subject forward. She wants it to be a little bit recessive, as it were. And we have the same thing with the use of when we have to choose articles. Because if you could say, there's a difference between saying God, the God, and a God. And these are choices we have to make for different cases. So that's constantly there is no set way of doing this. It's a negotiated choice for each line, for each meaning.
Is there, speaking of syntax, and there is another question we'll get to in a minute.
Actually, I just say more about this too.
Yeah, is there, I don't know Russian except for a few words, like how to introduce myself, but there are case endings so that you have words that rhyme or near rhyme much more frequently that come into the poetry. And I sometimes pick it up also seeing it on the page and how that might make its way into the English or not?
I try to deal with the sound as dense as possibly in English. I can't always pick up the rhyme if there is strict rhyme. Okay, when there's strict rhyme, sometimes I can be close or strict, sometimes not, but I can arrive at the same density of language. Another feature of Russian I should mention though is that Russian can pack into a participle what English takes a whole clause for. So that where we would say, the man who is sleeping, it becomes the sleeping one. It can become a single word. And that means very often some kind of rearrangement of syntax between English and Russian.
We have another question, and then we'll probably need to just do the last few poems, Jim, from one of our own wonderful translators, Sybil and Forrester. How do you communicate while working on translations?
Always, it's been all by email, been completely by email. So, you know, except for this, well, Tazhi tuned into another online translation reading I was doing with the other Russian poets. So she had heard my voice, but literally this was the first time I think I've heard her voice. No, I think I heard one recorded thing of hers at some point. It's been all by email. Someday, perhaps we will meet.
In some place other than the page where you've met many times. Okay, I think we're coming up close to the hour. So our idea was that you would finish, Jim, with a few of the newer poems that are not in Paper Thin Skin as a way of concluding this wonderful reading.
Well, I hate reading, don't like the idea of reading too many translations without her along to read the originals, but maybe I'll just end with a couple that she had prepared also for this reading, possibly a second set of poems that were written after the book came out. And I had prepared also the translations for those too. So I'll just read a couple of those. Let's see. A new fence, painted blue and white, screams, but I can hear sharp cries from the sea, a soft answer, drowned out by the waves. A boat canceled all conversation. A little gate swung open. An old woman is knotting a mat. A boy sitting on a swing watches her. In a tub, a fat baby splashes water. Along the waterline, the walls sprout grass like rattles. How cold the wind is here. Dried fish shiver on a string. I should say that one of the reasons why I do not attempt to read the Russian myself is because I read Russian poetry very badly and made a promise to another Russian translator that I would never in public read Russian poetry aloud. Blow on the water then. A bold river washes the shore away. Tons of milk flow through an unreliable land of honey. Trust that a step may not prove false, and just maybe it will not. Hands smell like autumn smoke. A humpbacked crescent moon slowly rises over an emptiness, over a new flood. A dog scratches a hole in the shallows. Water gone, the body is not to be found. And finally, we'll end with this. In the passageway of a stone labyrinth, a woman stands with her back to us. On the doorstep of a dark well, she holds the heavy door open with her foot. She has turned to the streetlight's face and cries out, laughing, "Let's go, I see you there. Ollie, ollie, income free. Mama's lost the game. Come out." Behind a parked car out of sight, a little girl sits on the curb. She watches a point on the blank wall. She breathes out steam, then holds her breath. waits intensely, watches from her scarf, lights in the window turn on and then off. They are laughing there and laughing here. Past a man with a dog, we pass, coming around full circle. Thank you.
Jim, thank you so much for that wonderful reading. It's always fascinating to see how the work has changed from the publication and what she's working on now for not just her, but any writer. So thank you so much for that reading. Thank you so much for that conversation about the work. I think, of course, we wish she was here with us to answer some of these questions and partake in the conversation, but perhaps next time we can have all three of you together to have this conversation. So just the richness in the work was really impressive, and then obviously that contributed to the richness in your conversation. So we're just so thankful. So we're thankful. Leora, Jim, thank you so much for being here. Everyone else in attendance, thank you so much for being with us, not only on this reading, which is our last reading of the 2020-2021 academic year, but this reading and all of them before it. We totally understand. It's been a difficult year for events and readings. But we hope these monthly Fridays added some literature and poetry and prose to your life, and got the weekend off on a good start at the very least. At least for me, reading and writing can definitely do that. So I hope everyone felt the same. So Leora and Jim, did you have anything else before we sign off?
Thank you for hosting us. This has been a pleasure. I hope we can do something like this again sometime.
Yes, thank you so much, Pardeep. Thank you, everybody who asked the questions and comments. Wonderful. And just for being here, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Check out Zephyr Press, and we'll kick it off again in the fall.
Looking
Have a
forward.
good night.
Take care.